Summer 1975. A nightmare awaits me. I am being recalled to Na-Torm headquarters. Do I have to go back to the hell again?
Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. So, yes indeed, this is the fourth of the launch trifecta, or quadfecta, or whatever the hell you want to call it, of Neo-Geo games that I promised. So, we're taking a look at NAM-1975, which, though technically all the Neo-Geo launch titles came out at basically the same time, this is actually considered to be the first game ever released for the system. And it shows in one particular way, which you may have noticed.
U.S. Army scientist has been kidnapped by possible Northside terrorists and taken to Nam's backwoods. So now we, a special force unit, have been organized to rescue him.
So, as I was saying, yeah, the one interesting little thing about this game is that you may have noticed when we started it up that there was no Neo-Geo logo, which there is in every other game. That's a little bit of a hint that this was maybe their initial launch title, because they decided to leave that little bit of promo out, because that was actually not part of the Neo-Geo hardware like it is with a lot of other systems. That was actually something that was individually put into each title. So, kind of an interesting bit there. But yeah, what is this game? Well, you're looking at it, and you're watching me get my ass beat at it. So this is a... I guess you could call this a rail shooter in the sense that it is an auto-scrolling game. It is kind of a shooting gallery. Oh, that's a little disturbing. It's basically a shooting gallery along the lines of Operation Wolf or something like that. But the thing that I find really interesting about this is, you've probably heard the term in modern gaming these days where, you know, A team, B team, etc. So you'll see like a developer that puts out one game that's really good and another that's maybe kind of not so good, and they'll be like, oh, they must have put the B team on this. You know, they're sort of second-rate, not as good talent. So some of the games in this lineup have been reminiscent of what you could maybe call B team efforts. This was definitely not one. If there was also such a thing as AAA back in this era, this would have been it. As you saw, I mean, there's tons of voices, tons of pretty impressive 16-bit static artwork in this game. The localization is actually pretty good quality. I mean, SNK is legendary for how bad they are at translating, basically because they really don't care. Whereas this game, as you saw in the intro, it's actually reasonably well voice acted. Like, the guy sounds kind of dark and disturbed, but, well, this game is pretty damn dark and disturbed when you see some of the imagery that's in it. There. And yeah, there's production value in this, really significant production value, and that's one of the things I find really neat about it, is that it is a rail shooter. It doesn't do a lot differently in terms of gameplay. It's a fairly practiced formula, but they really put some crazy effort into this, and it's really a shame because I'm assuming this game didn't do very well because there's never been another one. You can most certainly see a lot of the roots of Metal Slug and the like in here. Oop.
New operations have been watched.
You will die! So yeah, there are some... this game, though it does come across as fairly serious and dark, and it is, at the same time, it's pretty darn goofy in places. Like, look at what we're fighting here. So, you can definitely see a lot of roots in something like Metal Slug in this. Oh yeah.
This is Firebird. Headquarters. Over. We've been sighted. We'll abandon boat and go through Da Nang City. Over. How did they know our plan?
And it has a very interesting flow to it as well, this game. So, we just took out a full level and a boss, and Oh look, another boss. Straight up. Which I always thought was pretty cool. I'm not very good at avoiding this. But it has a really, really interesting progression to it, which is one of the things I find really cool about this game. And yeah, this game was clearly the one SNK... I mean, they wanted all their launch titles to really show off the Neo-Geo hardware, but this one, I think, more so than any other, was really the one that did that. They clearly spent a lot of money and a lot of effort on this game. But at the same time, you're kind of seeing the root of it here. I mean, this is the majority of it. It is an auto-scrolling shooter where your goal is to get to the end of the level without dying. Let's see if I can pull this off. This is another interesting thing.
Oh, thank you.
This is another bit that I always found kind of cool. So a lot of... SNK gets a lot of shtick for their portrayal of women in games, and truthfully, rightly so. There's a lot of pretty gross imagery. And this is one thing I think is really, really cool about this game, is that there is a typical damsel in distress type of idea at play, but if you rescue her, she doesn't just go, oh, thank you, give you a kiss on the cheek and run away. She pulls out a gun and starts kicking ass with you, which I think is pretty amazing. Oh, and then we get the tumble soldiers. And it actually acts as a, you know, the rescued hostages are actually a pretty powerful... really secondary weapon, for lack of a better term. And I always thought that was a really neat little thing, given that, you know, most people remember SNK for things like Mai. And this is most certainly not that, which I always thought was kind of neat. But you're seeing the idea here, and you can certainly see a lot of roots in some of their more famous and well-regarded shooter series like Metal Slug in here. You got your gun, which you can power up, you've got your grenades, you've got your ridiculous enemies, though I would say this is slightly more grounded in reality than Metal Slug is, for sure. And, well, you have your redonkulous difficulty curve. Staple of the Neo-Geo, and especially of the launch titles. This game starts out very easy, but it gets punishing very quick, especially in single player, because as best as I can tell, while this game has co-op, it does not scale in any way. So, aha, double gun. I just love me a double gun. So this is plays much like Contra in that, you know, one hit and you're toast, as you can see. Oh yeah, you set dudes on fire too, in a very graphic fashion. So, this game doesn't pull any punches. It's one hit and you're out. And the unfortunate part about it is that parts of it are easy, but parts of it are extremely arbitrary and unfair. The bosses in particular, they have attacks that are very, very hard to avoid, that can get you very suddenly. I mean, that sort of weird mech tank you saw at the beginning is an example of that. The thing is shooting a machine gun, but it also extends out its arm, and it's a very hard thing to avoid. So the way you avoid enemies in this is it's straightforward and yet also very complicated. So you have 3 buttons in this game. You have your straight up fire button, you have your grenade button, and then you have this button here, which allows you to do 2 things. If you just hold a direction and press it, you just sprint. And if you tap it while aiming in a backwards diagonal direction, so back and to the left, or front and to the left, or front and to the left, back and to the left or back and to the right, then you do a roll dodge. And the key to success in this game is that you have to very, very heavily use that. Oh, hang on. Another briefing coming up.
Information from headquarters. New strategy. Contact Allied plane and invade by parachute.
Okay, why not? The thing I find neat about this as well is that this in theory all revolves.
Coming in for attack.
This thing, the entire story of this game, such as it is, involves a single mission. So this is theoretically all taking place in one linear progression. There's no downtime in between, which I find kind of neat. And as you can see, now we're getting into the realm of insanity, right? Dudes are we're apparently hurling through the sky, but dudes are daintily parachuting in on top of us. Yeah, a simulator of the true experience of the horrors of war, this is not necessarily. But as you can see here, this is very suddenly getting very, very brutal. If it scaled better, I think that would have been good, but unfortunately, as we talked about with some of these other games, SNK really didn't understand how to curb difficulty with their original Neo-Geo titles. They were very arbitrary and generally unfair. And the general way you avoid enemies is you have to time your very liberal use of your run button to either run out of the way or dodge out of the way. But it's extremely hard to do that when you also have to focus on enemies, because if you the enemies basically never stop shooting as long as they're on the screen. So if you don't clear them out very quickly, they will keep pouring in, which means the bullet hell just gets that much more intense. So it really is a very delicate balance, and unfortunately... Uh-oh. Oh, noes! What is that? Boss plane? Oh my. So here's our usual kind of rail sequence. And this part I find kind of neat too, because as you can see, you are actually visibly damaging this plane by putting bullets into it. And it's actually rewarding you for that. It's not just aesthetic. It's actually giving you points for that. So you kind of have an incentive to do that. And as you can see, this is also very obviously a score attack game with a fairly what I would call traditional scoring system. Oh geez. Mass Driver Cannon. The scoring system in this game is certainly nothing revolutionary, but it's kind of an if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of dealie as well, right? So that's okay. I wonder if that door is going to open since I can't hurt it in any way. So, and you've got the general idea here. I actually still really like this game despite its punishing difficulty, because while the control system is frankly not all that intuitive, like the idea of how you dodge and sprint in this game is pretty clumsy, it is masterable, and this is a game whose... It has a lot of randomness in it, but the enemy deployment patterns are basically the same initially, so you could develop patterns for this to get pretty good at it if you were willing to put in the time. And I will say that though I don't have a co-op partner here, this game is definitely much more fun in co-op, because it doesn't scale. It is easier, without a doubt. Also, those choppers seem to be really oddly proportioned, but whatever. Still is in ninja combat. So the co-op is really how I would say this game is meant to be played. I mean, you really do need to... Yeah, this guy can take some punishment. There we go. This game, co-op is where this game really shines. If you have a buddy you can play this with, you will have a good time. If you play it by yourself, I think this is still, even though it was a launch game, I still think this is one of the design and production showpieces from the Neo-Geo, because though it may be a small sprite-based game, it may not have necessarily the visual splendor of some of their later fighting titles or anything like that. This was a pretty technically impressive game in 1990. This kind of blew a lot of people's minds at the time, and it pushed the system really, really hard, and it was clearly a game they spared no expense on. And this kind of is kind of sad in a way, because these were the games that I really loved to see come out of SNK, were these weird... I mean, that was what SNK was known for. I mean, the Neo-Geo as a whole was a friggin' kooky, weird system in general, right? That defied pretty much all convention. It was something that really made no sense in the video game market at the time, and that was what... Oh, now I have the ability to hurt this engine that can shoot guns at me. And that's what I really love about the system, and I loved about SNK at the time, was that they were defiant. It was so antithetical to the way the industry did business at the time, both the arcade and home systems. But they just went, "No, man, we got a cool idea, and we're going to do stuff with it." And unfortunately, what happened in the later part of the Neo-Geo's life, for the most part, is that they started to play things very, very safe, because this ridiculous strategy they had, though they stuck with it for arguably way longer than they should have,
We landed safely. Now we will attack the airport. There is a spy among us, but we must continue the mission.
Dun, 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 dun. Ugh, 32 hours. You dudes must be tired. So that was what the thing is unfortunately, because this was a crazy idea that the company decided to stick with come hell or high water, unfortunately it became, they started having to play things very, very safe later on. They relied almost entirely on fighting games later on, with the exception of Metal Slug. You never really saw games like this. Like, this game never got a sequel, which really surprises me given the effort they put into this one. They focused pretty exclusively on one or two types of genres, and that was the end of it. And don't kill the lady. Don't kill the lady. Dang it.
Oh, thank you.
So that was, and unfortunately, we didn't get to see a lot more stuff like this in the future, and that's too bad, because I really loved what they were trying to do with this thing. I think was really, really excellent. And if you really want to see examples of the mentality that the Neo-Geo was created under, you really have to, I think you have, the earlier back you go, the more of the system spirit you see, because the further along you get until the system's demise in 2002, the safer you see the stuff get. You almost see it take like an Activision route, where how they've done with Call of Duty, where it's just putting out variations on a theme every year because that's what sells, and oh god, we're totally screwed if we take any risks. But the Neo-Geo, the spirit of the Neo-Geo is one that is all about risk. It is about defying convention and doing weird stuff, and that's what these were. And that's why I kind of decided to showcase all my launch titles early on, because as we've seen, though some of them are better than others, to be sure, some of them are not very well regarded, and perhaps that's why they started to play things more safe, is because they, people didn't like things that varied from convention very much back then. Arguably they don't now either. Though they weren't all necessarily stellar, they were all interesting in their own ways, and that was what I really loved about this system. So we've done a pile of Neo-Geo games in a row, so we're probably not going to do any more for a little while, but I'm definitely going to talk about this system more in the future, because I think you're going to see stuff on here that you often wouldn't have seen anywhere else, and that's what I really like about it. And honestly, this game holds up pretty well. It's brutal, but if you're willing to put the effort into it, and especially if you've got a friend to play it with, it's still a lot of fun. I mean, I like shooters. I like rail shooters that are done well. And if you, this is a good time, especially if you've got it. Much like Contra. Contra was always better with friends, and this is no exception. This is the same kind of idea. So yeah, that is NAM-1975, developed and published by SNK Corporation in 1990. It was the original Neo-Geo title. This is available on the Wii Virtual Console, and it may be available in one of the SNK retail compilations as well, though I'm not 100% sure. I haven't actually managed to find out about that.
Our communications have been intercepted by the enemy.
But I think this is a pretty fun game. I still enjoy it quite a bit, and I think it is definitely a...
Dr. Muckley's daughter,
it is definitely a showcase of what made this system cool.
To the enemy's arms factory.
Yeah, we're probably never going to see anything like this again, but I think it's worth remembering for sure. My name has been Parallax Abstraction. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.